All right. Let me go ahead and get started here. I'm going to start sharing my screen. And we're just going to dive right into the content here. Again, my name is Jeff Batt. I work with the eLearning Brothers. I'm the product development manager. And so my goal today is to go over HTML5, how you can use it inside of Lectora, how you can bring it inside of there, how you can build it as well before you bring it in. And so that's the main goal. And one tool that I've found that's very useful is Adobe Edge, which is a free tool. We'll talk about how to get it and everything, but also a couple other options I'll mention as we go through. And so the first thing I want to mention is the files that I'm going to be using you can get at elearningtemplates.com, which is the eLearning Brothers website. So you can get the two files that the two interactions that we're going to be using and building inside of Adobe Edge. And these are freebies. You could download them. It doesn't cost anything. As well as the slides I'll make available, so you can download them from the Lectora website as well. Okay, so the session objectives for today, I'm going to be talking about different HTML5 options to begin with, and then we're going to be talking about how to bring those HTML5 interactions or animations or whatever we're building basically into Lectora. We're going to first of all talk about the eLearning Brothers interaction builder and just show you how to get an HTML5 interaction or even just an HTML5 file into Lectora and the process that you go about to do that. And then we're going to get into actually working with Adobe Edge. Now, again, the reason why I like working with Adobe Edge is because it has a timeline. It's you can animate things based on the timeline instead of trying to do it all by code. And so it makes it a lot easier for those who are not hard code developers to basically animate stuff on the timeline and then to take that stuff and then to bring it into Lectora. So we're going to be exploring the Edge Animate UI, and we're going to spend most of the time inside of Edge, but again, we're going to talk about, first of all, how to get it into Lectora. We're going to be talking about how to use external assets, images, or even how to create your own files inside of Adobe Edge, and then how to use the flexible layouts. The nice thing about Edge Animate is the fact that it can use flexible layouts and adapt to content. And then animating using keyframes, using the pen tool, which is, I'm a Flash developer. I learned to develop in Flash first of all, and this is one feature that I wish Flash would have had, is the pen tool. And basically I've absolutely fell in love with it, and it's a great tool, and I'll show you how to use it. Adding easing is a lot easier than inside of Flash, or if you're familiar at all with Flash, it's so much easier inside of Adobe Edge. It's basically like Adobe has taken all the good things about Flash and has made them better inside of Adobe Edge, or the things that they wanted to improve in Flash and made it better inside of Edge. So I'm really excited about Edge and the possibilities there. We're going to talk about timeline triggers. We're going to talk about playing audio in JavaScript because Edge itself is an HTML5 output application. And so it doesn't necessarily allow you to bring in and time things up to audio, but we'll talk about different options inside of there. They do also have something called down level stage for something that will display if it's not on a compatible browser. I'll talk a little bit about that. Now the deployment is how you get this out, how you get this ready for Lectora. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then using iframes. Now the reason why you would use an iframe is to bring in video. Or to bring in other objects as well. You can use that right inside of Adobe Edge. And then the fun part about Edge is the scripting. It's a really easy to add code, functionality going to different points in the timeline. It's a whole lot easier than it was inside of Flash if you're familiar at all with Flash. And so we'll talk a little bit about how you can start creating some interactive stuff as well. Okay, so different HTML5 options that I want to talk about. We're going to talk a little bit about, first of all, the interaction builder, the eLearning Brothers interaction builder. We also do have our eLearning Brothers templates, which allows you to, if you're more of a hard code person, you can download it and you can get into the code and you can actually modify it and tweak it and everything like that. But again, we'll talk about Adobe Edge, but there's also one other option I wanted to let you know about. If you're a Mac user or if you have a Mac, there's also something called Tumult Hype, which is very similar to Edge. There's a little bit of differences, but it is very similar, and I wanted to at least make you aware of that. Okay, so with the idea of building HTML5 is, first of all, you can use HTML5. You can basically pull up a text editor. You can start writing HTML, and you can use that to bring that inside of Lectora, like some of you may already be familiar with. I find it a whole lot easier to build the HTML5 interactions and animations in a tool like Edge, Hype, or the Interaction Builder, and then bring it into Lectora. So it's with Animate and with Hype, you basically get a WYSIWYG environment, you get a timeline based environment as well, and then you can use that to build an interaction, to build an animation, and then import that inside of Lectora, inside of your course. Now, Animate and Hype, they're not e-learning tools or m-learning tools specifically. They're more, you compare them more like Flash, where it wasn't really designed for e-learning, but it was great to be able to create a really custom interaction or a custom animation, and then use it inside of an e-learning tool like Lectora, because then that would wrap it up and put it into a SCORM 1 or SCORM or tin can environment basically, and allows the menu and controls without having to do all of that by hand as well. So, and that's really the beauty of using something like Edge or even like Flash or anything like that, is you get a little bit more of a custom animation, custom environment basically, which Lectora is also flexible that way as well. So inside of the way that you bring this inside of Lectora is use the web objects. Now you go into the Insert tab and then select the web window, and from there the Add Web window will pop up, and you could select different, the window source has different options. You can use a URL. I've found it's, from the testing that I've done, I found it easier to use the local web-based content. And when you browse for that, you browse for the HTML file. And in the HTML file, you basically make sure that the include all files and subfolders are there, and then click OK. And what happens is it then imports that inside of your Lectora course, and it's good to go at that point. So like I mentioned, the focus on this session is I'm first of all going to show you how to get some of the interactions from our interaction builder and how to just import that inside of Lectora, so we're familiar with that. And then we'll go into a deep dive of Adobe Edge Animate here. So let's go first of all into our interaction builder. Now you can get to this by going to elearningtemplates.com. You can go to our template library to download. Let me show you that first of all. If I go to the template library, go to freebies, you can scroll down here, and these two bottom interactions, Adobe Edge Animate tabs interaction, are the ones that we're going to, that you can download for free, so keep that in mind. But I'm going to go back here, and you can also go to our interaction builder over on the right-hand side here. And this is how you can get to the interaction builder, and you can test that out as well. But once you're in the interaction builder, you have a couple different tabs. You have the top left-hand side is the actual interaction editor, where you can select your interaction, a new interaction, and you can build it right here. Now you'll notice from the icons, some of them say HTML, some of them say Flash. Now you'll want to select one that says HTML and Flash, or just HTML, in order to get the HTML versions, basically. So if I come over here and I select, let's say, for example, a game here. Let me go to the game show. You can click on the preview button to get a preview of what this HTML game will look like. And if that's the game that you want to play, then you can go ahead and select that. Or you can click on the Create Now button. Now, if you click on the Create Now button, it'll walk you through step-by-step how to build this. So we have our body text, the instruction text. All I have to do is basically go out and fill this out here. I can attach an audio, I can attach an image as well, but then I come over to the left-hand side and just select on the different categories. Now the different categories, let me go in back to the preview here. On the left-hand side, you can always click on preview. This is our instruction text. I can hit start, and these are the different categories. So I can select on the different options. I get the question, the possible answers. If I get the question correct, the points get added to mine, and then I can come back here and add, and then choose a different category. Now this is where I would choose fill out the interaction title or the category title, and then come to category 2, fill out the title there. I can change the text, fonts. It's basically really flexible that way. And then the category 1, this is where I start typing in the question, type in the correct answer, and then type in the incorrect feedback as well. And then come in here and I can attach audio and images as well. And then I go through I don't want to spend a whole lot of time in this, but I just go through all the different categories, conclusions, play again button, try again feedback or try again button. And then the nice thing about this is I can now come to select theme. Now, we want to make it as flexible as possible with the interaction builder, so you can go through and see the different themes available to the interaction builder or to this game. And so if I want to switch out the theme here, I'll just go ahead and select whatever theme I want. And now you can see up in the left-hand side, the preview is updated, and I can preview this to make sure that's the theme I want. If I don't like it, I can go ahead and select a different one and adjust that theme as well. One question that's popped up already is the interaction software something that we can buy? If yes, how much? It is $99 a year, and you get full access to all the different interactions that we buy, and you can sign up for that on eLearningtemplates.com. So the interaction says HTML5 and Flash play on both Android, iPad, Apple. Yes, they'll play on Apple and Android and everything. So, all right, and so the last thing is the settings. You can choose if you want button sounds, randomize the questions, and different options there as well. Okay. And that's the interaction builder. So once you've built your interaction, and I have a couple of them already built here. Once you've built your interaction, it'll be in your My Saved Files, and you can come over here, and once you preview it, there's a download button, or you can actually just hover over the download button here. And you have the different options to download it as ActionScript 2, ActionScript 3 if you want to do it with the Flash, or you can download it with HTML5. Now if you click HTML5, it'll just take a second, then it will start downloading, and once it's downloaded, you can then bring it inside of Lectora. Now I'm going to hide some of these, and I'm going to go ahead and come to the game show. This is the folder that gets downloaded. And inside of the folder, you have a couple different items. You have an index.html file, and you have a game show and a core folder. Now, when you bring this inside of Lectora, if you have the option to include folders and files and everything, these two folders will automatically get copied over. However, one thing I found is you need to change the index.html5 to something else. Because Lectora automatically outputs as its main file as index, or there is automatically an index file. So I ran into some situations if I didn't change that, but I want to make sure that I do change this. So I'm just going to type in game show, and it really doesn't matter what you change that to, at least from what I've tested out. All right, so once the game show, you've changed that HTML file, now let's go ahead and come into Lectora. Now I already have this sample course that I've downloaded. I've used some of the images from the library as well as the Lectora player that we have in the library. And now I'm just going to come into my course, and I'm going to insert a page inside of my course, a new page, and I'm going to name this game test. And that's pretty much it from here. So now I'm going to go into the Insert tab like we learned, and then I'm going to come over to Web Window over on the left-hand side, and I'm using Lectora version 11. This will work inside, web windows are inside of older versions of Lectora as well. If I select that, and then I can come to the window source. Now the window source has a web address. If I have this game hosted somewhere else, I can bring it in through a URL that way. Or I can use the local-based content. Now the local-based content is what we talked about before, bringing in the HTML file, and then it will bring in the other folders as well. So that's what I want to do, is I want to select the local-based content, and then all I have to do from here, actually make sure that include all files and subfolders are selected. All I have to do from here is click on the Browse button, and actually make sure the local web-based content is selected, hit the Browse button, and then go find that your game show folder, and you want to select the index file, which is now called game show. But you want to select the HTML file and hit open. Now this message will pop up, but this is a message from our this is a message just saying this won't be supported inside of certain versions. But you'll see the little preview of the game here. I can select OK, and if it looks like I've already brought this in, this core folder, you can just hit replace or cancel. And now you get this web window. Now, it doesn't automatically resize to it, so I'm just going to position this over. And our games by default are 720 by 540, so I'm going to just change the width here to 720 by 540. And just kind of position that in the middle of the presentation there. Okay, so one thing to keep in mind, if I try to preview this, it actually won't preview inside of here. You'll actually need to put this on a website before you see the preview. Now, the reason why is our games actually need to be running with PHP, need to be running on a server. And so it's not anything to do with Lectora. It's basically the games that you've downloaded from the Interaction Builder need to be on a server in order to run. So it will work once it's on there, so keep that in mind, but you may want to upload it to a website to preview it, or if you're running something like a local server, you can do that and test it out there. But once I have it up, let me go to that sample here on the website. And then it will run inside of my Lectora course. I can test it out, hit start. And now I have this very interactive HTML5 game inside of my Lectora course as a regular page, which looks like to the learner that it was built using the same tool as well. So, all right, so that's how you build an interaction from the Interaction Builder, download it, and then bring it into Lectora. So now we're going to go back into the into our presentation. We're going to talk a little bit more how to build more custom interactions inside of Adobe Edge, but I just want to make sure that there's no questions here, or let me just go through some of the questions. One of the questions is, can you use it for commercial use? Yes, you can use it for commercial use. Were your interactions created in Adobe Edge Animate? The ones from the library, there's 2 of them that were that you can download, but these ones were actually custom HTML5 interactions, this game show one that I'm showing you. One question is, if you were running WAMP on the desktop, yes, that would work if you're running WAMP. And that's basically so you can see the preview. One other question is, will eLearning Brothers games run on the LMS? Yes, they will run on the LMS. You basically, if you bring it inside of a Lectora course, so if you download it, put it inside of a Lectora course, it will run on the LMS. All right, so there's some other questions, and hopefully we'll get to them by the end of the session, but for now I want to go ahead and continue because we still have a bulk of the content to spend on Adobe Edge here. Okay, so what is Adobe Edge Animate? Adobe Edge Animate is a WYSIWYG environment. So if you think of something like Dreamweaver, you also get a little bit of a WYSIWYG environment, but you can't really take an object and position it inside of there unless you turn on different settings or unless you adjust your HTML or something like that. Well, Adobe Edge Animate actually is a WYSIWYG environment by default. So it's more like Flash, where you can just draw an object there and directly position it wherever you want on the stage. You have different library assets, exactly like Flash. You have different fonts that you can embed as well. And so there's a lot of flexibility with Adobe Edge. Now, the benefit, though, is the fact that you can animate this with the timeline. Now, you can do all of this by code. You can go into the CSS filters and timings and different things like that, and you can still do everything that you're doing inside of Adobe Edge. But why waste the time? When you have something like Adobe Edge, you can go in and you can start animating different things. And this is the real benefit to it, is that timeline-based animation. If you want something coming in, fading out at certain times, and you want this to work on mobile, then Adobe Edge is your tool for this, or something like Hype to Multype or something. And so then once you've done that, then it will work on your mobile devices, it'll work on a browser. And then also, if the certain browsers that it won't work on, there's certain ways that you can handle that, and I'll show you how to do that. So how does this come into play with e-learning is the question. And like I mentioned before, is really it works really nicely with Lectora. The fact that you can build an animation, a mobile animation, and then you can import it as a single page inside of Lectora, and then you can use Lectora to wrap it all together. And so when the learner's going through it, they still have their menu and they still have the navigation inside of Lectora. And so that's where I see the real benefit of Adobe Edge, is getting those custom animations and then basically going into Lectora and then using Lectora to navigate through those custom animations. And you can build interactions. Like one question was, were these built in Adobe Edge? Well, not yet. We're working on building all of these in Adobe Edge, but the fact is you can build all of the different interactions from the interaction builder in Adobe Edge. And so it's that flexible that you can go through and build these custom animations, custom games, custom interactions inside of Adobe Edge to still use it inside of an e-learning tool. Now, the question is, where do I get Adobe Edge? Well, you can get Adobe Edge and all of its additional tools at html.adobe.com. And we're going to go ahead and go to the website real quick. And if you go to html.adobe.com and you click on Edge Services and Tools, and you can click on the Get Started Here button down at the bottom, and you have to have a free Creative Cloud membership. Now, Adobe Edge is free. You don't have to pay for it, but you at least have to sign up for their Creative Cloud. If you are, excuse me, if you already have Creative Cloud, then it's actually part of your Applications Manager. If you come into your Adobe Application Manager and you scroll down, let me come in here real quick. Again, if you don't have to pay for this, if you're not paying for Creative Cloud right now, you can still sign up for the free version of Creative Cloud and get the Adobe Edge tools. So we got Adobe Edge right here. Click on Install, and it will install it inside of your tools. Okay, so once Adobe Edge is installed, you can start using it along with the other Adobe Edge tools. You got web fonts, phone gap build as well. So there's a lot of things that you can do there. So that's where you get it, is html.adobe.com. And again, all these tools that you're seeing on the window here are free from Adobe. Okay, so let's get into the actual tool. Let's get into the content. So Adobe Edge, when you first launch it, the first thing you'll see is the Getting Started section over on the right-hand side. Now, the Getting Started section has a lot of different in-app lessons. Now, these lessons will take you through how to get started. It'll take you through how to create different objects like shapes. It'll take you through how to start animating. It'll take you through how to start using the pen tool, again, which is one of my favorite tools. It'll take you through how to start resizing, extending, and reusing different objects from one Adobe Edge project to another Adobe Edge project. Now, these lessons, what happens is when you start a lesson, over on the right-hand side is the lessons panel, and it takes you through step by step on what to do. So if you wanted to walk through an example, it will tell you, okay, click here, click this, do this. So you're actually creating the content, so you're actually doing something, which is what I really like. You're getting your hands dirty and building the actual content when you're going through these lessons. So those are really helpful. Another useful thing is the Resources tab. If you select the Resources tab, it'll have links to Edge Animate's JavaScript APIs. It'll have links to the Adobe TV, where it has a bunch of different tutorials where you can get started with Adobe Edge. So when you're starting with Adobe Edge, the first thing you want to do is create a new project. When you create a new project, you basically just click on the Create New button and you save your project to a folder somewhere. Now what happens is it creates an index file or an HTML file, and then it creates the necessary JavaScript files along with a folder called Edge Includes. Now Edge Includes will include jQuery, JavaScript, and a couple other items as well. But this isn't your output content. This is basically your working projects. But then you see an .an file, which is an Edge Animate file, and that Edge Animate file is what you use to bring it up. So when you download it from our template library, that's the file that you double-click in order to open it inside of Adobe Edge. But you have to first of all have Adobe Edge installed. So let's go ahead and just create a new project here. I'm going to go into Adobe Edge, and I'm going to click on the Create New button here. And I can start working with my project, but the first thing I want to do is just go ahead and save it. So I'm going to hit Control S or Command S. I'm going to go to my desktop, create a new folder, and just name this folder Sample. I want to make sure that I have it inside of a folder so all of my content is in one location. And I'm going to go ahead and name it something. Now, if I'm going to bring this inside of Lectora, then I already know that I probably shouldn't name it index.html. If you're going to have this just on a website somewhere, then it's okay to name it index.html, which is typically the standard. But in this case, excuse me, I'm going to go ahead and just name this sample and hit OK. Now, if I go to that folder on my desktop, let me go back to my desktop here, click on the sample. There we get our JavaScript files. So we have our sample.html file, our sample.an file, and then our different JavaScript files. Now again, if I close out this project and I go back to my folder, if I want to open up this project again at any time, or if I've downloaded the other templates from the library, I can just double click on the sample.an file and it will open up the project. It's similar to, I make a lot of references to Flash, but it's similar to like the FLA from Flash. It's basically the project file. Okay, so let's walk through the different items inside of the different panels. When you go into Adobe Edge, the first thing you see, the main area is the stage area. Now the stage area is where you put your different objects on the stage. And these different objects, you can make your own circles, squares, different things like that. Or you can bring in files from Photoshop, from Illustrator, or whatever image creation, Snagit, whatever image creation tool that you may have, and you can import that inside of Adobe Edge. So, and you get the rulers on the side, so you can align stuff, and so it's very typical to what other tools, stage areas may have here. So, the next user interface part is the toolbar. Now, the toolbar has different parts to it. The first, it's not as much of a selection tool or a toolbar as other tools that you would see, but it still does the necessary stuff. So you have the selection tool, you have the transform tool, as well as the clipping tool, which is kind of like the crop feature. You also have the rectangle tool, rounded rectangle tool, eclipse or ellipse tool, as well as the text tool, so you can insert text there. And then your color changing tools, both for the solid color as well as the border around it as well. And then the last button that you'll see is the layout defaults. Now there's different options. We don't have enough time to get into it, but there's different options that you can select in the layout tool. I find that typically the default layout works perfectly fine there. So, okay, so now over on the left-hand side is the properties panel, or the properties the tab. And so inside of the properties settings, you have a couple different options. You have the width and the height. Now this is where you adjust the width and the height in order to fit inside of Lectora. So if you're working with a player that has a 720 by 540 presentation area, then you want to make sure that you adjust your Adobe Edge Animate file to 720 by 540. You can also change the stage color if you wanted to, as well as the minimum and maximum width. And this is if you're working with adjustable stage areas. And then the overflow is anything that goes beyond the 720 by 540. So if you have an object that starts off the stage and then comes on the stage, typically that's hidden by default, but if you want it to be shown, you can do that as well. But again, by default, it's typically selected as hidden. Autoplay is it'll automatically start playing. If you unselect autoplay, then you're going to have some trigger like a start button or something that will automatically start, or that will allow the user to continue in your interaction. Composition ID is more if you're getting into more of the hard code. You can have different canvas IDs, composition IDs. Now the down level stage, this is where it comes into play if you're on, for example, if the learner tries to see it from a non-compatible HTML5 browser. This is where you can say, you can add a message saying you need to navigate to an HTML5 browser in order to see this. Or there's other options as well. Another option is a prompt that will install a Google plugin, and the Google plugin will actually run on old browsers, and so it'll still allow them to play it on old browsers, but they'll need to install a plugin. Now, the poster image is typically if you're going to output this to something like iBooks Author. And so if you're not going to be doing that, if you're just bringing it into Lectora, then you really don't need something like that. And then a preloader. Now, one thing I always found difficult in Flash was the ability to add a preloader. I mean, it's still possible, but for some reason, I always thought it was unnecessarily complicated. But here, it's actually very easy to just select a preloader. And so if you have a lot of objects that are kind of loading, you can select a preloader there. And then the Actions panel. The Actions panel is where you can start adding your interactivity, adding different things when the learner clicks or when the stage is ready. You can add an alert or something like that. We'll talk about that. Now, the next part of your main timeline, and again, we're just exploring the different parts of the user interface right now. We'll get into it here in a second, is the actual timeline down at the bottom. Now, the timeline, you have a couple different options. You have your play, pause, rewind controls, auto keyframing mode, and we'll talk about that once we get into animations. Auto transition, which will automatically create a transition between the different keyframes, as well as the auto toggle pin. You can select that and it will actually toggle the pin mode. And so when we talk about animations, we'll talk about the pin mode. And then the easing control. This is where you access your easing. If you select an animation, select this button, you can add your easing, like your bounce effects or different things like that, which is extremely easy to do inside of here. The timeline bar. Now, the way that this really differs between this and Flash is the fact that Flash used keyframes and different frames. With Adobe Edge, HTML doesn't use frames. It doesn't understand frames. It only understands milliseconds. And so the timeline is actually within milliseconds. And so that's one thing to keep in mind is your, it will show like the 1, 2, 3, and those are the seconds, but you're basically working with milliseconds when you're working with the timeline bar. Object layers, these are the different objects in your interaction and your animation, as well as the timeline triggers. You can have different things happen at different points of the timeline, which comes in really handy when you're creating the actual interaction. Timeline labels as well, so you can label different parts of the timeline, which also comes in handy when you're wanting to take one person from one point of the timeline to another point of the timeline. And so, again, we'll get into all of that, as well as the add keyframe buttons. If you select on these objects right next to the different filters or whatever, it'll add a keyframe at whatever point you're at. Okay, and so we also have zoom controls as well as show grid, timeline snapping, and show only animated objects as well. Okay, so let's get into some of this actually. Let me skip through some of those. Actually, let's go through some of this really quick. We also have the elements panel, which allows you to, the object order, selects the object order to reorder stuff, to group objects, scripts per object. We also have the library, which allows you to keep all of your assets, your project symbols, which is like movie clips, if you're familiar with that in Flash, and then embedded fonts, any type of embedded fonts. I'm going to skip here for the sake of time, and I'm going to come down to more of the animation stuff here. Okay. Let's get into the tool here. So we've talked a little bit about the objects. We've talked a little bit about the properties panel. We've talked about the stage area, and we talked about the timeline, as well as the elements panel, and then the library panel. Now, if I come over to the toolbar up on the top left-hand side, I can go ahead and draw out a rectangle. And you'll notice that the properties panel changes depending on what I have selected. So in this case, I have an object, just a rectangle selected. Now, if I come over here, I can change the visibility. I can also change the X and the Y values over here. I can also change the width and the height of the object, and then come down to the color. I can change the color if I wanted to change it to a different color, or new to the latest version of Edge is the ability to change gradients, to have gradients on your objects. And so if I select this gradient tool right here, all I have to do is select anywhere here, and you'll notice that I can select the gradients. So this, by default, will start me out with the linear gradient, or I can come to a radial gradient if I select on this option, or even hold it down for different types of radial gradients. Now with the gradient, basically I just have two different colors, that I can adjust right here. So you can get really nice looking buttons inside of Adobe Edge without having to make them inside of Photoshop or something like that. And so you can come over here, choose your different colors, and then you can add a stroke to it as well, and then change if you want it to be a solid dashed line, dotted line, and then how big that stroke is. You can adjust the width of the stroke in there as well. You can also adjust the transform the objects right here if you really wanted to get technical, or just by selecting it, you get the handlebars that you can also adjust the width and the height here. Also rotation. Over on the under the transform tool, you have the rotation, so you can rotate your objects as well on the right-hand side here. So another nice option with the properties panel is the cursor. Now the cursor right now is selected as auto. If I select that, you actually have the ability to change the cursor when somebody hovers over this. And so if this is going to be a button, you can change it so the hand shows instead of the regular default mouse cursor. Now, the way that you preview this, let's say I want to see how that looks. The way that you preview it is hit Control-Enter, which is the same way that you do this inside of Adobe or inside of Flash, if you're familiar with Flash. And so, or Command-Enter if you're on a Mac, and now it'll preview inside of a browser, your default browser. So you can see now if I hover over that object, it switches over to the hand cursor, and that's way I can make it look more like a button if this is a button. Or I can just switch this back to auto if I wanted to. And you have a couple other options. Corners, you can change your it to rounded corners just by selecting the word or the number here and adjusting that number. I can also come into the number 4 here, and this allows me to have a little bit more control over all 4 different sides. So if I wanted to create more of a tab-looking object, I can come down to the bottom, adjust the number there. You actually go that up to 20 there, and adjust the number on the other side. Go to 20 there, and now I can kind of position this up to the top and make it look more like a tab. If I wanted to create a tab interaction, I can do that by adjusting it inside of Adobe Edge here. A couple other items is the shadow. You can add a shadow, you can add a filter, you can add clips, and then you can add accessibility. Accessibility allows you to give it a title as well as create a tab index, and so it's very accessible that way. So if they needed to tab through it, you can make that inside of here as well. So okay, so that's how you create shapes. You can do different other shape, or you can do rounded rectangles. You can do ellipse tools, as well as just bring in your own images. If I go to File, let me go back to the template library here, and let me actually go to our cutout people here. I'm just going to grab somebody of these cartoons. And we're just going to grab PNG file, download it. Now if I come into Edge Animate, I can go to File, and then I can go to Import, go to my desktop, and grab this Brady cartoon, hit Open, and hit OK. And you'll notice this is pretty big, but I can resize it inside of Photoshop and then bring it in, or I can just resize it inside of Edge as well. So that way I can work with images outside of Edge. I can also bring in Photoshop files and Illustrator files as well. If I hit Save, there we go. We have our 2 objects here. Coming back into the properties, if I select the stage area, this is where I can change the width and the height. Now I know that my presentation area already for my Lectora course is 720 by 540. So let me come back into here and adjust the width and the height to 720 by 540. And now I have a stage area that will fit perfectly inside of that presentation area inside of Lectora. So that way I can make this a little bit bigger as well. And then I can come in and add some text. If I select the text tool, select anywhere on my stage. Adobe Edge Animate works a little bit different with text. It actually pops up a different window for the text. So you just type in and adjust your text, where you just type in some text, then you can position this wherever you want. So if you had bullet points or something that are coming in, and you can start animating bullet points into your stage area. Okay, so I'm going to jump right into actual animation here. So if you come down to the timeline, and let's say that we wanted to, first of all, animate this character Brady inside of our timeline. So down at the timeline, there's a couple different options, or a couple different ways that you can do this. You see these buttons where it says auto keyframe mode and then also auto transition mode. Now, auto keyframe mode, if I turn this on, whenever I move Brady here, it will actually create a little keyframe down at the bottom for this Brady object. Now, if I move my playhead, this red line, over to, let's say, just a couple notches over, and let's say I decide to move him somewhere else, you'll notice that it automatically creates another keyframe. Well, also, because I have the auto transition on, it also created a transition between the two. But if I don't have that on, it'll actually just create a dot, a keyframe, which means that if I hit Control Enter, you'll notice that it just kind of jumps. It doesn't transition. It doesn't animate from the one point to the other point. That's where the auto transition option actually comes really handy. If I select the auto transition option here, all I basically have to do is, with my playhead in a different area, is move over Brady to that object, and it'll automatically create a transition between the two different keyframes. And so you can see that instead of just jumping, it actually animates from that point to the next point. So that's how you would automatically, and then you can come throughout the timeline and just move him different places, and you can see that it's just going to automatically create these different keyframes and the animation bouncing down, back and forth as well. Now, even though that's an option, that's not my favorite way to animate. My favorite way to animate is actually the pen tool. The pen tool, you can get into by a couple different ways. You can actually select the pen tool button over on the left-hand side, which will turn the pen tool on, and you can tell that it's on by this little blue dot right above the playhead. Or you can actually double-click on this yellow. And I find it a little bit easier to double-click on the yellow, because if you're down in the timeline way over here, it's a little bit easier just to double-click on that yellow rather than coming all the way over here, selecting the pen tool, and then going all the way back here as well. Now, the reason why I like the pen tool is because you can animate, if you already have your objects on stage and you wanted to animate them coming from off the stage on the stage, you don't have to go back in and say, okay, I want to start off the stage and then I want to end on the stage. You don't even have to move it off the stage to begin with. The nice thing about it is you can position it where it's going to end up, and then you can use the pen tool to actually animate to that point, or to animate from off the stage and have it to where it's already located, basically. And that it took a little bit of time to kind of wrap my head around that, but if I go into the pen tool, I'm going to double click on it, and I'm going to take the pen tool, and the pen tool is basically my point of where this is at right now. So I have the text selected, and this is where it's going to end up. So in that case, I'm going to move my yellow object, my yellow playhead. I have a blue line, but I also have a yellow playhead. I'm going to move that to the back because I want this to start out off the stage. So I'm just going to move that off the stage. Now you'll notice if I double click back to get out of the pen tool, you'll notice that it's now basically creates the animation back to where it was before. So if I hit Control Enter, you can see that it's now animating on the stage. Now the opposite is true as well. If I move the yellow playhead before, this means that this is where I want it to move to. Not move from, but move to. Now if I hit Control Enter, it's going to move from where it was to the new location, basically. So you can move the pen tool either forward or backwards, but this is extremely nice because if you're in the timeline, you can say, okay, I want the animation to come from off stage right about here, and it just creates the animation from that point to the next point. And then you can see, okay, a little bit down the road, I want the animation to fade out. So you can then come to the visibility and just kind of fade out there, and you can see that at this point it's going to fade out. And then, so the pen tool, Even though it takes a little bit getting used to, it's an extremely useful way of animating. Let me go back, preview that. So it comes in on stage and then it fades out at a certain timeline as well. Okay, so that's how you start animating your different objects, which is extremely flexible here. But let's say you wanted to start adding some interactivity. And I apologize, I haven't been able to look at the questions yet, but I want to make sure that I get through some of the bulk of the content here. So I'm going to come in and come back to the very beginning of the timeline. And let's say I wanted to create a button. And so I want this object at the very first. Let me just add a question here. So I'm going to add this question, which is a square, and I'm going to have a square, and then I'm going to have a circle here. Now this is just a simple example that I use. I'm going to show you how the other interactions were built, but this is just kind of the starting of what you would do. Now inside of here, you don't really, the only thing that you can do if you're wanting to jump to certain points or to show different things at certain times is the best way that I found is to create it along the timeline. And so on the timeline, you can stop the timeline at certain points by creating an action. Now, the insert trigger right above the timeline allows you to insert a trigger or an action at any point of the timeline. So let's say I want this to, at the very first, just kind of stop. There's a question, and I want them to answer the question. So at the very first, I can insert this trigger by clicking on the Actions layer, clicking on this Insert Trigger, and it will pop open with the Actions panel here. Now the Actions panel is really nice because over on the right-hand side, it actually has all the different commands that are most used, basically. And so you can add a stop command just by selecting the stop, and you'll notice here it adds the stop code, which is JavaScript, and that's all I have to do is basically just hit the exit button, and now I have this action layer down at the bottom here. And that will stop it so it doesn't actually animate anything. Now a little bit down the road, let's say that we want to have another object here. Now that object is, we want it to, basically at this point, it's going to stop here, but at this point let's say we want to have what the answer is. And so I'm going to add some more text and say correct the answer, wait, let's actually say you are correct, and have that right below the square. Copy that, paste it, and say sorry, not correct. Okay, so we have these two answers, but I don't want them to show until they've actually responded to something. So the way that you can make something not show until a certain point of the timeline is by moving your playhead to a point of the timeline that is going to show, select the object, and then come over to the Properties panel. By coming over to the Properties panel, select on the drop-down box, and then select On, which means up to this point it's going to be off, but at this point it's now going to be on. It's going to display. And now come down a little bit later, we want this to be off because we're going to have the feedback for the, we're going to have another point in the timeline, the feedback for the circle display at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, at the circle, the feedback for the circle is going to be on at this point. Come down a little bit later in the feedback and then say, okay, at this point it's going to be off. So that means at the very first they're going to be asked a question, and it's going to stop at the very first of the timeline, and then if they select the square, it's going to jump to this point in the timeline and it's going to display you are correct. If they select the circle, it's going to jump to this point in the timeline and it's going to say no, sorry, incorrect. And so that's the way that you set it up first. But in order to actually jump to these different spots, or in order to make sure that it doesn't go beyond, because right now if I jump to the spot, it'll just start the timeline play and then come back to the very beginning. I need to add some stop commands at the end points of this as well. So I'm going to hit the stop command or insert trigger, select stop, hit save, And now it'll stop at this point, and then I need to do the same thing for the feedback for the circle here. So I'm going to hit the action trigger, select stop, and that way if I jump to this point in the timeline, it's going to stop and not go on to the feedback for the circle. So now a nice thing about this though is right now if I try to add like a trigger to this square to say, okay, if they select the square, jump here, I would have to know what the milliseconds are to jump to that. But you don't have to do that exactly, or you don't have to know what the milliseconds are if you use labels. Right above the Actions panel is a button called Insert Label. If you click on the Insert Label, it allows you to add a label, and I'm going to say square, and I'm going to come to the next point of the timeline, and I'm going to insert another label, and I'm going to say circle. That way, at the very first here, and I'm going to insert one more at the very first and say home. So if at the very first, it's going to stop. I'm going to allow them to select one of these options, and if they select the square, it's going to jump to the square timeline here and play and stop at this point. If they select the circle, it's going to select or play to the or jump to the circle part, and then it's going to play and stop at this point as well. So we got it all set up here, but now we need to add on some functionality. We need to add on the ability to jump to these different spots. Well, by selecting your object, you come over to the Actions panel over in the Properties area, or you can come to the Actions panel down on the timeline. You have to make sure that you select the object. That's why I always come up to the Properties panel here, because I know what object I have selected. So I select the object, and you'll notice that it gives me what type of triggers is going to be. When is this going to happen? Is it going to happen when I click, when I double click, when I touch, when I lift up, when I'm done touching, on the mouse enter, mouse leave, different things like that. Well, this is going to happen when I click, which also will handle when you're actually touching. Just keep that in mind. But I want to jump to a certain point. I want to play the square. So I'm just going to select play, and it'll say sim.play, but I need to specify where I want this to play. So I'm going to just add in quotes the name of the point in the timeline. Now, if I didn't have these labels, I would have to actually add like a milliseconds or what point in the timeline I wanted to add or I wanted to jump to. But in this case, since I'm using the labels, I can just say, okay, jump to square. Let me just test that out and make sure it's working. So if I select that, you'll notice that it jumps to my square. Okay, that's working, and now I need to get the circle working. So I come over to the Actions panel, click on select click, hit play, and then within these parentheses add quotes, and then say, okay, circle is where I'm going to jump to here. So now if I hit the circle, it says sorry, that is incorrect. If I hit the square, it will say sorry, or yes, that is correct. Well, I can also animate these in to begin with if I wanted to, but for the sake of time, I just wanted to at least show you some interactivity that you can start doing. And you can even start, if you can add more, if you come back into the Actions panel, you can see, okay, on the mouse over, I want something else to happen. I want to change the colors, or I want to do different things like that. And so that's how you start getting into the actual interactions here. Now, let me go into the library, back to the library here. I'm going to go to freebies, and I'm going to download these sample files that I've already built for you in Adobe Edge Animate. So this takes what we've learned so far and basically applies it a little bit more. So I'm going to hit download. I'm going to close out of this project, and I'm going to go into the tabs left folder that I've downloaded, and I'm going to select the index.an file. If I select that, it'll open up with my index or my HTML file, my animation file, and you'll notice basically the same type of setup. So we have the introduction, we have tab 1, tab 2, tab 3, tab 4, tab 5, tab 6, and tab 7. And at the end of each of these tabs is a simple stop command. And now that stop command basically says, or at each of these tabs, if I have it selected, I can go into the Actions panel, and you'll notice the different triggers. So mouse up basically will jump me to tab 1. Now it does a couple other things as well, like plays sound and stuff like that, but mouse down will jump me to certain points of the buttons as well. So it's a little bit more complicated, but it's still the same type of setup that I was just showing you. Edge also has the ability to create symbols. So if you come over to, if you select any type of object, you can right-click on it and convert it to a symbol, and you can give it a symbol name. And it's basically just a movie clip, if you're familiar with it in Flash, which allows you to have a nested timeline inside of this button, basically, or inside of this section. And so if I double-click into it, is how I get into this nested timeline. And you'll notice this is how I set up the button. So we have a normal state, an overstate, and a down state. And so right now I have it set as normal state. But I added a trigger that whenever you hover over it, it'll jump to this overstate. Whenever you click on it, it'll jump to this down state. And then once you take your mouse off of it, it'll go back to the normal state. Now I added that trigger inside of the actions panel by going to the mouse over trigger, and you can see that I get the variable name, I get the symbol. Basically, I'm talking to tab 1, and I'm saying, okay, go to and play over. So you can take a look at the code. Again, I don't have enough time to explain all of it, but once you're done with this interaction, you can just come in here, and let's say you wanted to modify what it says in tab 1, just double-click into tab 1, start changing out the text, whatever text I want it to be, and then just hit Control-Enter, and it will change the text, and then I can then bring this inside of Lectora. So if I hit File and then Publish, it'll publish my course, and I can now bring it inside of Lectora just by in the same way, going to Insert, Web Window, and then importing it just like I did with this game. And it will import it inside of my Lectora course. A couple of other objects, and again, the slides will be available on the Lectora website, but a couple other things you may want to explore is the ability to play audio. I show you how to establish the audio path, how to play audio inside of here, as well as the YouTube, playing a YouTube video or other web content inside of here as well. So you may want to check that out. But it looks like we're out of time. I just want to make sure that I go through some of these questions. If you don't have any questions, thank you for taking the time to take a look at this presentation. It's a lot of content to cover within an hour, but hopefully you can see more. You can download the samples from the eLearning Templates website and see more of these samples coming out, or more of the templates that you can then download from our template library. Okay. One question was, can you show us how to bring character videos in from eLearning Brothers? We don't have enough time to do that, but you would use it in the same way that you're bringing in the YouTube video or something like that. And so go ahead and check out the slides once they're available there. If we upload the course with our game into review link with the games, will it run correct? It should, yeah. If you upload it, it should have all the content into review link. I'm not as familiar with review link, but review link is, from what I know of it, is web-based, and so once it's on the web, it should work. Can you have a score report to the LMS? You can. I find it easier to, actually, you can establish a variable and then send its. Actually, it would be a little bit harder, but there is some JavaScript that you can do to take a variable and then report it. None of our templates from the eLearning Brothers are set up that way yet, but that is something that we're looking into. If you run your statement of running on the server threw me off. Just wanted to make sure it runs on an LMS. Basically, when I say server, it's the web. And so anytime that it's on your machine, it won't run the games from the interaction builder. But once you put it on the web, basically making it available for everybody, then it will run fine, which the LMS is on the web. So it will run fine once it's in the LMS. Can the template be customized? Yes, the template can be customized. You can download, you can open up the code, you can start customizing the code if you wanted to. Can you build apps with Edge or just mobile sites? You can build apps, you can build phone gap apps, you can build different games interactions, and then bring those inside of Lectora or whatever you wanted to do there. The Flash source files are editable, sorry, or the eLearning Brothers export Swift files. If you get the library subscription, then you actually get the FLA files, and so that might be the best way to go if you wanted to open that up in Flash. Will Adobe Edge convert Flash ActionScript 2.0 or 3.0 into HTML5? No, it will not, but there is an extension that you can actually get for Flash and export it in your Flash interaction to HTML5. And that's with Flash CS6, I believe. That's something you may want to look into. In Adobe Edge, can you save your project local, or does it have to be on the cloud? The project is local. There's no way that it can be on the cloud to begin with. It is on your desktop, and then you have to upload it to the cloud or to a website. Can I import an existing Flash file to Adobe Edge? No, you cannot. It doesn't work well with Flash. Can you convert a Flash animation to Adobe Edge animation? No, if you wanted to do the animations or anything like that in Flash, I recommend going back to that Flash exporter, which is, let me actually go to extensions. You might want to check out let me see if you can find it. I'm only looking at this because there was 2 questions about it. So let me go to adobe.com, go to products. Actually, let me just type in Flash. Right here, learn about new support for HTML5. So you can actually, using this extension, which is the toolkit create.js files, you can actually export your HTML or your Flash animations to HTML. Now it's completely different than Adobe Edge. Adobe Edge is its own tool, basically. So if you're worried about converting Flash files over to HTML, then you'll want to check out this extension, and they have some tutorials on it and everything on Adobe's website. The webinar, I think, was recorded, so you can access that on Lectora's website later. For 508 compliant, correct accessibility, yes, you would use that for 508 compliancy. Will animate.psd files, Photoshop files, you have to slice those out, the Photoshop files, into images, PNGs, and then bring them inside of Adobe Edge, and then they're just regular image files at that point that you can animate. Can we add audio files into Edge Animate? Yes, you can add audio files, and you do that by establishing a path to the audio file and then adding the trigger audio.play. Check out the tab examples that you can download from the template library, and that basically has an example of playing some audio there, so keep that in mind. I don't know if I have a chance to get through all of these, but I'm just going to spend a couple more minutes if that's okay, just going through some of these questions. Can we animate a transparent background? Yes, you can animate the transparency of any object or anything, or any shape or image or anything like that. Can you add audio with these animations, right? You have to do the audio by this way. There's no way to just import audio inside of Adobe Edge. Are you going to show us how to import it into Lectora? Yeah, importing it into Lectora is the same way that we did it with the library, the interaction builder. You just click on the web objects and then import it from there. Can we get the source files? If you download it from the library, yep, you will get the source files there. How do we publish? What's the option you need to click in order to be available for Lectora? And I kind of breezed through that a little bit, as there's a couple questions on that. So I'm going to go through File, Publish. You don't see anything that happens, but inside of your folder, there is now a Publish folder. This Publish folder has a couple different options. I'm going to delete these iBooks and then Animate options. The real option you want to focus on is the Web folder. If you select the Web folder, this index.html file right now, it's called the index. You may want to, again, change that. So I'm going to change it to tabs, and this is the file that you want to bring in. So you want then come into your Lectora course, click on Insert, go to Web Window, go to, I've changed this to local-based content, hit Browse, and go to my desktop, and then I'm going to go to Sample, actually no, go back, Tabs left, Publish, Web, and then Tabs. Wherever the published location is, select Tabs, hit Open, and then there you can see a little preview of it. Hit OK. And there we go. Just go ahead and resize it inside of Lectora, and it'll work perfectly inside of Lectora there. So, where are the Edge templates? The Edge templates are on eLearningtemplates.com. And we go back there, eLearningtemplates.com. If you go to Template Library, select the Template Library, go to Freebies. You'll have to create free accounts first of all. But once you create a free account, you can get access to all of this free content. And down at the bottom is the tabs interaction that you can then download the zip file, open that up inside of Adobe Edge. Can I use Swifty in Flash Pro? Yes, Swifty is a Google option to export the HTML5, but yes, you can actually use Swifty to export your Flash content. I will be new to Adobe Flash and Edge. Which do you recommend the two to start out with? It's kind of a loaded question. There is a lot to learn about Flash. There's a lot to learn about Edge. With the way things are going right now, I would recommend, first of all, learning Edge. Flash is kind of in a transition mode in my opinion. I don't see it completely going out, but I see it more adapting to HTML output. But until that transition mode is kind of done, I would recommend Edge for sure. Can Adobe Edge Animate be used on its own to build standalone web apps? Yes, yes, definitely it can. HTML5 didn't communicate with Lectora training. Is it possible that the HTML5 shows the next button placed in Lectora? It is definitely possible because Lectora does open up its JavaScript that you can do. I don't know how to do that yet, but that is a great question, and it's something that I want to learn a little bit later. Any special programs needed for these instructions? The only thing you need is Adobe Edge at this point for everything I've gone over. Does the animation, HTML5 animation, will work on the LMS once it's converted inside of SCORM? Yes, it's the browser more so than the LMS that you have to worry about. Can Edge content be turned into an iPad app? Using PhoneGap, yes, it can be. So look into PhoneGap and you can upload your Edge content into it and use that. Will my application still support fluid design? It depends on where your application is being placed into. Right now, if you're using something like this, like the iframe, this doesn't actually do fluid design yet. I hope so in the future, but right now, just keep that in mind. But if it's running just on a regular browser, then it would. All right, looks like we have a couple more questions. I know I'm over time a little bit, but just going through the questions. I will be new to Adobe Flash and Edge. Will you recommend both? I think we already had that question. How can you tell which HTML5 animations are supported in which browsers? Well, good thing actually. Adobe Edge will actually give you a little bit of a warning sign, and if you select the warning sign, it will tell you what's not supported in certain browsers. So that's one thing to keep out in mind. I also heard of another website called caniuse.com. I haven't even explored this, but it will basically tell you what's supported in different browsers. So that's another useful website. Well, what if I have multiple interactions? Can you have multiple core folders? No, if you replace the folder, it only needs one core folder. So if you replace the folder, or if you don't replace the folder, if you're bringing in the interactions from the library or from the interaction builder, as long as you have one in there, then you're fine. You don't need multiple ones, but as long as you have one in there, then you're fine. Isn't there a preview as HTML button in Lectora to be able to preview the HTML content in Lectora before publishing? Yes, there is. However, and that will work fine with Adobe Edge. However, when you're working with the interaction builder, that it requires a little bit more stuff to preview, and so that's why it needs to be on a web server. Can I do animations like speaker mouth in Adobe Edge like I do in Flash? Yes, you can do that. It requires a little bit more of the different poses in the pictures, and so keep that in mind. It's just a little bit different in that way. Okay, that's all the questions. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and close out the webinar, but thank you. Hopefully it was some useful information. And if you have any other questions, you can contact us at support@elearningbrothers.com, or you can go to Lectora, ask questions about Lectora, but this information will be posted on the Lectora website. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Jeff.